And what if the greatest time travel journey of all time wasn't to the past, but to the future? Imagine a caveman, frozen in time, who wakes up in 2080. What would be scarier for him? The gigantic skyscrapers that touch the sky? The strange absence of nature as he knew it? Or the profound loneliness of not being able to communicate with the bizarre creatures that surround him? Dive with us into the first day of a prehistoric man lost in our world of tomorrow. Culture shock won't just be an event. It will be his new reality, his guide through a labyrinth of lights and sounds that defy his ancestral understanding. His primitive mind, a repository of ancestral wisdom about hunting, survival, and the relentless cycles of nature, was paused, his survival instincts dormant in the deep darkness of time. For countless ages, his brain, shaped by the constant need to read nature's signs, to predict danger in the rustling of leaves, and to find shelter in the earth's belly, remained in a state of forced hibernation. The first sound that disturbed his sleep wasn't the familiar sound of nature, birdsong at dawn, or the distant howl of a predator, but that of an electronic hum, cold and constant, announcing the opening of his crystal prison, the capsule. His hunter's eyes, once able to discern the movement of prey in the densest darkness and follow the faintest trail under the relentless sun, were now assaulted by a cold, sterile light that emanated from smooth, shining surfaces, from unintelligible screens that flickered with unreal colors. He used his brute strength, a legacy of generations of struggle for survival, to get up, his muscles dormant and his body heavy, strange to this new gravity, this new balance of the world. He, who was once the undisputed king of his small domain, the master of his primitive skills, felt like a scared child, lost in an unknown world, with no solid ground beneath his feet, only hard, cold surfaces. He touched his body covered in animal hides, his only familiar comfort, inhaling his own scent, a mixture of campfire smoke, earth, and the sweat of the hunt, a stark contrast to the air around him. But the predominant smell in the air was of metal, plastic, and electricity, a strange and insipid odor he had never smelled before, which told him nothing about danger or safety, about food or threat. His awakening was only the beginning of a sensory nightmare, an immersion in a universe that defied all the laws he knew. He used his strength to open the capsule door, hesitant like a wild animal leaving its den. But what he found outside was even more terrifying than his primitive mind could have conceived. The lights flickered all around him in a visual cacophony of dancing neons and spectral holograms, and he saw figures in motion, dressed in clothes that seemed to change color with every glance, adorned with lights that blinked and cybernetic implants that glowed beneath their skin. The sound of flying car traffic gliding silently through the skies like mechanical creatures, and the giant holographic ads that hovered over their heads were like the roar of a giant, omnipresent, and unattainable animal, a sound that penetrated his bones and made him tremble with fear. His instinctive reaction was that of a cornered predator, pure, paralyzing fear. He moved cautiously, slinking through the shadows cast by the strange lights, his senses on high alert, desperately trying to find some familiar pattern in this new and chaotic landscape. Like a wild animal entering a hostile, unknown territory, his primitive mind, accustomed to deciphering the subtle language of nature, the wind in the trees, the track in the dirt, the distant call of a companion, was now completely lost, unable to comprehend what was around him, to find any logic in this world of metal and light. In his world, hunger was a clear signal for the hunt, a primal stimulus for action. Survival was a constant search for food and water, dictated by the rhythms of nature. But in 2080, his instincts, once so sharp, were completely useless. He tried to hunt, lurking in dark corners, looking for any sign of wildlife. But what he found were flying drones that buzzed in the sky, and food delivery robots that glided through the streets, mechanical creatures that offered him no challenge or sustenance. His wooden spear, which once made him the best hunter of his tribe, capable of taking down a bison with a single accurate blow, broke uselessly upon hitting the cold and impenetrable metal of a cleaning robot that swept the floor without even noticing him. Frustrated and consumed by hunger, he tried to find a river or a stream where he could quench his thirst. But what he found were strange water fountains embedded in walls and machines that spat out a colorless and tasteless liquid. He tried to drink from a puddle he found on a side street, but the bitter taste of metal and pollution made him reject it immediately. His stomach revolted by this impure water. His desperate search for sustenance was a painful proof that his primitive nature, once the key to his survival, was now a heavy and useless burden in the world of 2080. His inability to communicate with the strange creatures that surrounded him was perhaps his greatest challenge, an invisible barrier that separated him from any hope of understanding or help. His grunts and gestures, the simple and effective language that once united his clan that conveyed danger, joy, or need, were met with blank stares, condescending smiles, or even fear. The people of 2080, accustomed to communicating through flickering screens, through touches on invisible interfaces, and through synthesized voices that echoed in their ears, were unable to understand his most basic needs, his silent pleas for help. He tried to make hunting gestures, pointing to his mouth and then to the flying drones, but people thought he was begging or trying to mimic the vehicles. When he tried to talk about his clan, about his family and his home lost in time, they thought he was talking about an old TV show or a mental issue. The overwhelming feeling of isolation and the profound frustration clouded his senses. He was completely alone in a crowded world of millions of people, but was tragically unable to connect with even one of them. His primitive brain screamed at him to hide in the shadows, to fight this incomprehensible threat, but his body knew, instinctively, that this was not a fight he could win with his muscles or with his spear.
And what if our caveman, lost in this technological labyrinth, had the bizarre opportunity to glimpse virtual reality? His reaction would probably be a terrifying mix of fascination and terror. His mind, accustomed to a tangible world of simple colors, real textures, and concrete forms, would suddenly be bombarded by an incessant flow of images and sounds that defied all the laws of physics and nature he knew. His brain would go into sensory overload, unable to process the overwhelming avalanche of unreal information. And he, who was once the king of his world, the master of his small reality, would now be reduced to a scared child, lost in a virtual world he couldn't understand, where the rules changed at every instant. What would he think of first-person shooter games, where virtual figures fought fantastic monsters that didn't exist in his world? His primitive mind would probably be unable to differentiate the real from the virtual, and his heart would race with a visceral fear, the same adrenaline he felt when he was being hunted by a predator of flesh and bone. His reaction to virtual reality would be a stark testimony to how his primitive brain was not prepared for the abstract and illogical nature of future technology. And what if, in a moment of boldness or desperation, he tried to use a smartphone for the first time? His reaction would, predictably, be one of total confusion and profound frustration. He would pick up the smooth, cold object, examining it with the same cautious curiosity with which he examined a new stone or a strange insect. He would try to touch the screen with his dirty hands, but his primitive fingerprints would not be recognized by the sophisticated sensors. He would instinctively try to smell the phone, like an animal sniffing its territory or an unknown object, but what he would find would be just the inexpressive smell of plastic and metal. His attempt to communicate with the device, to make it work in the same way he used his stone tools, would be a painful proof of how his primitive mind was not equipped to interact with future technology. Perhaps he would try to use his sharp spear to interact with the screen in the hope that making it respond. But the inevitable result would only be a broken screen and yet another source of confusion. What would he think of this strange object, which seemed to contain infinite images of people and places he had never seen before, of voices that spoke without a mouth? His primitive mind would be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information, and he, once the master of his limited tools, would now be a scared child, clinging to a useless object in a world he couldn't understand. So who could he trust? Who would be able to see past his primitive appearance and recognize the humanity lost beneath the hides and the confusion? He would need someone with an open mind, someone who is able to understand his impossible situation, to see his untapped potential, and to help him adapt to this overwhelming new world. His first genuine interaction with a person from the future would be a crucial moment, a turning point in his journey. What would he think of someone who doesn't fear him at first sight, who doesn't avoid him with repulsion, but who looks him in the eyes and sees in him a human being, no matter how different he is? His primitive mind would be unable to understand the words that would be spoken to him, but his heart, that ancestral repository of pure emotions, would tell him, perhaps through a gentle look or a soft touch, that he was not completely alone in this strange universe. What would he think of someone who offers him food, who dresses him in warm and comfortable clothes, who treats him with a selfless kindness? His primitive mind would be unable to process such an act of goodness without an immediate quid pro quo, but his heart, recognizing the genuineness of the intention, would tell him, whispering in the depths of his consciousness, that perhaps not everything in this future was cold and merciless. His painful awakening was just the first hesitant step on an unpredictable journey, an uncertain path that stretched out before him like a dense and unknown forest. So, what will be the next chapter in this caveman's extraordinary journey? What will happen when he stumbles upon the abstract concept of money for the first time, when he confronts the strange idea of work as a form of survival, or when he encounters the complex and inexplicable emotion of love in a world that operates by rules so different from his own? His primitive reactions to a world saturated with technology give us a fascinating perspective on our own evolution, on the paths we have taken and on what we have lost along the way. His profound culture shock is our own mirror, a poignant reminder of how far we have come as a species, but also of how our most basic instincts, that primordial essence of our humanity, can still be our most reliable compass in an increasingly complex and dehumanized world. What do you think? Has our technological intelligence, with all its advances and wonders, truly surpassed the ancestral wisdom of our forebears, their deep connection to nature and its rhythms? Is our constant evolution, in its essence, an undeniable step forward towards a utopian future? Or is it possible that at some point along the way we took a tragic step backward, alienating ourselves from our own essence? Leave your comment below, share your ideas, and let's explore these fascinating questions together. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be a part of this incredible journey through time and culture, and to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos, where we will continue to unravel the mysteries of the past and the future.